Good morning, everyone. The 2021 Mood of the Boardroom CEO survey is focused on coming out of COVID. New Zealand was ahead of the play last year in the early stages of the pandemic. Remember that mantra? We went hard and we went early. However, as other nations have opened their borders and their populations become vaccinated against COVID, we've been playing catch up. This year's Mood of the Boardroom survey has a strong focus on what business wants as New Zealand prepares to come out of COVID. It's not going fast enough for the business sector. CEOs want more tools to keep their people safe. For instance, the ability to mandate staff to be vaccinated before they come back into work. Access to antigen tests, these are illegal here. More saliva tests and more tools that their counterparts use overseas. And a majority also want the government to set a clear vaccination target for Kiwis to shoot for. There's widespread frustration at a Wellington knows best attitude. This is just some of the sentiment from the 2021 survey. The Herald survey, taken in association with Business New Zealand, attracted 151 respondents, predominantly from large companies. Many of the NZX top 50 listed companies were contributors, chief executives from virtually all major trading banks, key dairy sector players, some professional advisors and several senior directors. The survey was launched straight after the government announced its Reconnecting New Zealanders to the World framework on August 12. Then Delta intervened. By August 17, New Zealand was back in level 4. CEOs were upbeat when the government finally got to unveil Reconnecting New Zealanders to the World. This is a framework to guide Cabinet as it prepares to reopen in the first quarter of 2022. But a week later they were saying, where's the detail, the targets, the dates? Typical comments from business. Delta predictably caught an unvaccinated and smug New Zealand with its pants down. Vaccine rolled out too little and too late, and they've had a year and they've bungled it. Nearly 2/3 of respondents were unsatisfied with the plan. However, the self-isolation pilot was a plus. 41% want to join it. And there were mixed views on whether or not to set a firm target date to reopen the border. Auckland has now been under COVID restrictions for more than 7 weeks. The Delta outbreak has put pressure on government, businesses and citizens alike to get the vaccination tally up. 74% of CEOs want vaccines to be mandated. 33% are offering incentives to get the vaccine rates up, and another 33% are extremely worried that new variants might emerge. Another 58% are somewhat worried about that, and this is a top concern driving businesses' call to move on with this. But the number one challenge, as Spark CEO Jolie Hodson says, is we have to find a pathway out of COVID. One that will enable us to live in a world where we can live with COVID-19 like any other, quote, influenza. So looking to factors about COVID, it is having a huge impact on business, as you can see from the slide here today, which looks at domestic concerns and how COVID impacts on that. Skills and labour shortages are at the top of that. They're impacting on confidence severely in New Zealand. We have a tight labour market which threatens our post-pandemic economic recovery, particularly as these skill shortages continue to increase. Staying on this slide, you can see from the slide that CEOs rate the impact of other domestic concerns on business confidence highly, and they're all COVID related. The community transmission of COVID Delta, immigration restrictions, border protections, making sure they're secure, international transport logistics, which is a supply chain bottlenecks, and international trading environment. These are all interlinked and they're weighing down on business. These border restrictions are such a headache for business that 71% of CEOs are saying sourcing skilled staff is the biggest factor keeping them awake at night. And we have another 72% who say those very same issues are hindering their business operations. And against this, there's the added threat of offshore recruiters coming into New Zealand and poaching their staff. Xero Director Susan Peterson says these restrictions are having a real impact on New Zealand's tech sector. For instance, jobs Xero is creating and could locate here are now being recruited in offshore hubs as they don't have sufficiently locally trained New Zealand talent and are not permitted to bring it over the border. Jacinda Ardern's COVID honeymoon has soured. Just 1 year after she pulled off a historic victory in the October 2020 election, her reign has hit some stumbling blocks. Tardiness in getting sufficient New Zealanders vaccinated before this latest outbreak, the Delta one, has helped pave the way for a punishing Auckland lockdown. CEOs in the 2021 survey marked her performance as Prime Minister at 3.03 out of 5, and you can see from the slide that's well down on last year's rating. There's no doubt this is Ardern's toughest year yet as Prime Minister. She's midway through her second term as PM and will want to make headway with her government's massive reform program before the next election. There's also running sores to address, like growing inequality. Her ability to build confidence with business has been at a low, and you can see all these factors on the slide here. As Mainfreight CEO Don Braid has said, consultation with the business community has improved, but it needs to continue and improve further. But Ardern's international celebrity has also been an undoubted asset for New Zealand, this during a pandemic which has resulted in many political leaders conducting foreign affairs by telephone or Zoom. She has name recognition, and her highest rating in the survey was for representing New Zealand well in its host year of APEC. The way she leverages her personal brand for New Zealand's international advantage and stands up for New Zealand's values and interests with respect to China and the United States is also highly rated. Her government's also embarked on a politically impressive economic agenda, centralising healthcare, water and politics, but the COVID focus counts for more in this year's survey. Rob Fife, who's Ardern's business advisor on the COVID recovery, says that to date and on balance, the strategy from the government has served us relatively well. But he says we now need a step change in execution ability if we're not to slip behind the rest of the world, particularly as we head into 2022. We need to flex our border settings to reflect individual traveller risk. We need to be using isolation at home, and we should have been using alternate testing regimes 9 months ago, such as saliva. The good news in this survey is that CEOs are in a much more resilient space compared to last year. Confidence has rebounded from last year's incredibly historic lows, where they were still coming to terms with the COVID pandemic shock. Overall, respondents rated their optimism in the New Zealand economy at 2.7 out of 5, and this is up from last year's low of 1.36. As you can see on the slide, global economy optimism has rebounded even further, showing that despite COVID-19 numbers remaining significantly high, the international vaccine rollout has clearly helped buoy international confidence. Executives rated optimism in their own industries the highest of the 3 scores, and you can see there at 3.2 compared to last year's 1.9. Won't dwell too much on the international factors here. As you can see, further waves of COVID internationally will have an effect, and supply chain bottlenecks and more. And this is an international environment that is going to persist for some time. So this is out there, we're all having to deal with it. When it comes to Grant Robertson, an overwhelming 71% have confidence in the Finance Minister's management of the economy. They applaud the way he's implemented the wage subsidy scheme again with this latest COVID Delta outbreak, but they also have warned him to be careful with the latest COVID spending. They want more fiscal discipline and accountability, and they say they're still waiting for a long-term recovery plan that will increase productivity and reconnect the country with the world in terms of trade. And there's a few KPIs here that we expand on in the report, and basically it's looking at a raft of things where the government has had in front of it. One of the things which is quite clear this year is that the work that government has done around Maori and Pacifica aspiration has been rated well from business. The others you can see there, down rating of course business consultation and again immigration. When it comes to Cabinet, Robertson again comes tops in the Cabinet rankings. Interesting this year, the number of new players that are seen in the top 10. CEOs admire, in particular, the plucky fight that newbie Cabinet Minister Kiri Allan has put up against cancer. But there's also recognition that she carries that spirit through to her portfolios. But Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy has lost reputational footing with CEOs. He was top of the ratings overall in 2019. But this year he's dropped to 19th place, and this is a recognition and impatience from business over the lengthy time it's taken him to address the urgent need to fast-track residency applications. When it comes to rating the opposition leader, there's clearly issues there. CEOs say that National clearly needs a refresh and to concentrate on issues that matter. When asked whether the party has sufficiently renewed its personnel at both party and political levels and policies since last year's election, an overwhelming majority, which is 90% here, say they haven't. New Zealand's top CEOs say National's Judith Collins is failing to hit the mark as opposition leader. Their support for Collins has waned. They're concerned she's lost sight of the issues that matter to New Zealand, and her negativity is not appealing. They were asked to rate Collins' performance as opposition leader by holding the government to account on critical national issues. They scored her at 2.06 out of 5. And as you can see from the slide here in front of you, this is a big drop from last year's survey, which was held just 1 month prior to the 2020 election. More than that, over 1/3, 35%, scored Collins at a mere 1.5 on her performance. In contrast, ex-David Seymour is impressing CEOs. Over 50% of those surveyed scored him an incredible 5 out of 5 for political performance, and we've not seen that in this survey before. They're rating him at 4.36 out of 5, the highest rating of all party political leaders. This is also the highest score he's received in the Herald's annual survey. And what they're saying about him is, in effect, is he is the de facto opposition leader, the only party leader making serious traction against the government in debating serious issues. The survey also reveals heightened concern about wealth inequality in New Zealand among our top business leaders, and you can see these issues on the slide in front of you. I won't detail them all, but as you can see, there's concerns about an underfunded health system, there's concerns about housing shortages and more. And on top of that, respondents are worried about a rise in crime and even outright anarchy if this is not addressed. I won't go into the detail too much in these final slides, but some other issues which are in front of business. Climate change, again, divided views on whether we're doing enough to meet our international commitments. And this will be a big issue in front of international leaders worldwide when the COP26 meeting gets underway in Glasgow later in the month. And then there's the supply chain headaches. These are having an impact on business confidence, and they're also having an impact on inflation. What's happening, as any consumer knows, is that goods coming into the country are now going up in price, and this is actually a major issue also for business, particularly as they're having to wait for supply chains to actually operate. And as I said, this is playing through to inflation. And so here we are, the inflation beast is on the loose. 44% of CEOs believe these higher inflation rates are baked in for some time too. And you can see a bit in the report, which takes that down in detail. 31% say it's largely transitory, and this is having an effect on business. As we can see here from the survey, there's good expectations about higher profits, higher revenue and increasing staff in the coming year. But on top of that, there's now a COVID caveat. The impact of COVID on those expectations is going to take a while to actually work out how it will hit. Boards will be looking at their numbers and reforecasting depending on how long the actual current restrictions go on. But however, there's still a prevailing mood of optimism out there. New Zealand has shown it can deal with COVID. There's a lot to be done, but if that gets done, the ultimate outlook is positive. Final word here to Joan Withers. Joan Withers from the Warehouse Group chairs one of the largest retail operations in New Zealand. In her view, if we manage our way forward well, we'll be seen as a great place to live.
Kia ora, good morning, and a very special welcome to our guest this morning, Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson, Minister of Finance, of course. And Grant and I have just listened to Fran's very extensive overview of this morning's Mood of the Boardroom report, and we'll get into some of those details shortly. But first of all, Minister, I wanted to quickly touch on any overnight news in relation to COVID, and in particular the situation in Waikato.
Yeah, good morning, Shane, and good morning to everyone watching. I don't have any new numbers overnight. We get those a little bit later in the morning. What I can say is that, as you would have heard from the Director of Public Health yesterday, we can connect all of the cases we've got in the Waikato at the moment. There were 17 as at yesterday. And so all of those are either household contacts or close contacts of the original 2 cases that we found. People I know would have seen that Kawhia and Karapiro Cambridge were caught up in this, but they are people who were already connected. So we'll keep a close eye on that to see what happens over the next 24 hours or so. But for now, that is a cluster, and it's a cluster that we believe we know the members of.
I guess one of the issues will be that people in Kawhia and Cambridge were operating under, I guess, essentially level 2 and may not have been staying put as much as others in level 3 and step 1 of that we are here in Auckland. There was a call last night from one of the mayors that perhaps that boundary does need to be extended to wider Waikato, but there are issues, aren't there, with that, just how big the province is.
Yeah, look, there are, and when we made the original announcement about the alert level 3 around the Hamilton and Raglan areas, we acknowledged that this is an area where it's very difficult to create that boundary. Look, we will look closely at the situation, particularly for Kawhia, to make sure that we feel we've got that under control. And if we did need to move, we would. But at this stage, we're feeling comfortable about that. And I did note that, for example, one of the cafes in Kawhia had said, look, we're going to go down to effectively a level 3, contactless, click and collect type behaviour. So people will do that, I suspect, if they're feeling uncomfortable. One message I've got for people everywhere, but most especially in those areas, is this is the opportunity. Please do get tested, but also get vaccinated as well, because ultimately that's going to be the thing that will protect you.
All right, thank you, Minister. Let's jump straight into the mood of the boardroom ratings. Now, you've heard Fran this morning, read the supplement in today's New Zealand Herald. The honeymoon is over for Jacinda Ardern and your cabinet. Business confidence, while it's up on a year ago, there certainly is criticism from the business community of the government's handling of the pandemic. Can you give us a quick overview of your own response to that, to the survey, and what the CEOs are saying this morning?
I'm not sure we ever felt the honeymoon period from business, to be honest with you. But look, clearly we're in very challenging times here. And, what I took out of the survey is that two big things stood out for me. One was resilience. The New Zealand economy has been incredibly resilient over the last year and a half. And while we're in a challenging period at the moment with this particular set of restrictions we've got, we do need to take a moment to realise that the New Zealand economy has performed incredibly well compared to the rest of the world, but even on our own terms, really solid rates of growth, unemployment down very low, our debt is very low compared to the rest of the world. The average debt to GDP ratio in advanced economies is over 90%. So the New Zealand economy's done well. Within that, there are particular sectors and businesses who have been really, really struggling, and we've tried to support those as we go. And then businesses themselves, you can see the level of confidence they've got. The second emotion I can feel flowing through the report is frustration, and I absolutely get that. Everybody wants to be able to move forward as quickly as we possibly can. But as everybody knows, the virus is tricky and difficult, and we have to be careful and methodical in what we do to make sure we don't lose all the gains from last year, but that we do make progress. And Fran talked about the Reconnecting New Zealanders plan. People will have seen announcements in the last couple of days about vaccine certificates. We're moving forward with that self-isolation pilot. So, we are making that progress, but there's no easy decision in COVID. I've found that. There's no costless decision in COVID. And so I feel that frustration, I share it, but we've just got to keep moving forward towards the first quarter of next year, where we will see that reconnecting plan roll out.
Let's pick up some of that specific frustration and what we're hearing in the report this morning. And that is, and we're hearing it from a lot of the business leaders and the wider community, and that is from this, even including this week's announcement, just the lack of specific dates, timeframes. Auckland now, obviously, it's at step 1 of level 3 and the new plan here. But what is the time frame? We heard from Ashley Bloomfield 4 to 8 weeks. Is that correct, that Auckland is looking at still 8 weeks in level 3?
Yeah, look, COVID doesn't operate on a timeline, sadly, and that makes it very challenging. And it's ideal, obviously, in any situation to say this will happen on this date and this will happen on that date, but that has not been our experience with COVID. In terms of what Dr. Bloomfield was talking about there, he was talking about what the modelling says to get us to that 90% plus vaccination rate. We want to keep moving forward. That's why we outlined those 3 steps. And we'll take a look at where vaccination rates are, where we are in terms of the outbreak, what we know about the cases. Yesterday, we had 30 odd cases in Auckland, but only one of them we weren't able to immediately connect. So, we also look at the health system, how our public health system, our contact tracers are going, how our hospitals are faring. So we have to factor all those things in and then take forward the steps from there. The good news is the rates of vaccination and people booking for vaccinations have actually really increased even just in the last few days. And so 4 to 8 weeks was the modelling we had for how long it would take to get to 90%. That shouldn't immediately be connected to everything in Auckland, and we'll make some further announcements about the shift in framework in the next couple of weeks.
So what you're saying is 90% is the magic number? Because the government's never... Okay, 90% plus. Is there a magic number over 90%?
There isn't, and the reason there's not a magic number is we can give an overall figure for the population, but within that you've got to drill down into the different regions of New Zealand, the different age groups, the different ethnic groups, and we've got to be comfortable that we're actually getting that widespread of vaccination across the population. So sometimes those headline numbers can be a little bit misleading, but you know, people will have seen Professor Hendy's modelling that was released last week. There's some contesting of that by others. Regardless of which number you pick, we have to get ourselves to those high levels of vaccination in order to make sure that we don't see the gains that we've made lost, that we don't see significantly increasing hospitalizations or death rates, and what that means for both people but also the health system. So, you know, that percentage figure is one that people want to hang on to, but in order to lock in our gains, we've got to make sure we get at least 90% plus.
Sure. I want to come to communication, and I think the CEO has rated the government very highly. Obviously, the health response has been considered world-class over the last 18 months. It seems to me there's a lot more criticism, and we've seen it in the last few days around the communication. I mean, you yourself were on News Talk ZB on Monday morning, I think, saying elimination was still the only strategy, yet we had the Prime Minister less than half an hour later saying that we were in a transition phase. What's going on there? And, you know, even the changing in the levels and in terms of the step changes that we're seeing, that there's a lot of confusion here in Auckland as to what actually people can still do in the next few weeks. Is something broken down in the communication strategy?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think whenever we've moved to a different type of alert level or a new set of rules, there's always, if you go back, you'll be able to find headlines going back when we first brought in the alert level framework, when we first shifted around. Remember, there was big debates about where you could cycle and where you couldn't cycle. This is the nature of when we bring in new parts to the framework, that people take a little bit of time to adjust. I'll also, say that as we announce things, the detail of that gets coloured in, particularly when we're writing up health orders, and occasionally things shift a little bit and we have to take on the chin when we don't get that 100% right. But I would argue that overall, we've been, commenting clearly and often to people about what our plans are. In terms of the elimination strategy, I mean, it's really important to think about what the core of that is. So yes, Delta has made getting to 0 cases extremely tough and challenging. But the other core elements of the elimination strategy, which are our border restrictions, our testing regime, that when we do find a case, we contact trace aggressively, we isolate, all of those things are still in place. We are still chasing this outbreak down while we get vaccinated. The big difference in the transition that the Prime Minister is talking about is to one where the individual armour of vaccination becomes the core of our strategy. So yes, Delta's made 0 cases difficult, but those other elements of our strategy are still in place.
Okay, turning to business, and obviously you've heard there's 40 pages of the business response in this morning's paper. I think Business Now and Ian Taylor, he's written 4 columns over the past month for the Herald. It has talked specifically about business coming off the bench for the team of 5 million. In other words, having direct access to the likes of yourself, Cabinet, and really government using that business expertise across all facets of the next response in the COVID in the COVID outbreak. And Ian Taylor himself has given a very good specific plan around how self-isolation for overseas business travel. Are you taking on board any more business consultation and feedback? Because I know that was a big criticism 12 months ago.
Oh, look, it's rumbled along. I mean, I think sometimes there's a difference between consultation and whether we agree. And we might not always agree, but we're definitely listening, and we're definitely working with the business community as we are with other parts of the community. And I want to thank Rob Fife in particular for the role that he's played alongside working with the Prime Minister and myself and others on being that connector. We're having very regular conversations with business about a range of elements of how we're managing COVID. Later on today, Dr. Verrill will talk a bit more about testing. We've been working with the private sector on all parts. So when we announced the vaccine certificate, yes, that's the Ministry of Health announcing that, but they've been working with private sector entities in the development of that work. So it's a constant process of communicating. Right now, we're out consulting on how vaccine certificates will be used in the new framework for managing the virus with the business community. I'm talking to banks, I'm talking to businesses, to the peak bodies with Business New Zealand and the EMA and others. So it's a constant process. It doesn't mean we'll agree at every single point of that process. And I've got a great deal of respect for Sir Ian. I've known him for a long time. And actually the things he's talking about within self-isolation are part of what we're working towards. That's why we're doing the pilot. The Reconnecting New Zealanders strategy has self-isolation as a critical element of what we're going to do in the first quarter of next year. The thing is, all of these things, testing, rapid testing, self-isolation, have to be integrated into an overall response that balances those important public health goals with being able to open up and support people to travel. So it isn't easy, but we are definitely listening, and we continue to value the contributions that we get.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess Sir Ian Taylor, he's done actually 80 or 90% of the work in terms of his own idea and plan. He's got on board hotel chains, health experts, both here and in America, and obviously making the plea that businesses like his and others who are at the forefront of innovation need to be travelling and need to have face-to-face meetings across the world. Are you across the specific Ian Taylor plan?
Yeah, I've certainly had a look at it, and as I say, in many ways, it's not that different from the self-isolation pilot. He's got some elements of new technologies that he wants to see used in there, different types of testing and so on. And Ian's got great connections around the world. In terms of that point of people wanting to travel face to face, absolutely. And our self-isolation pilot, I think the expressions of interest closed this week. We'll be on to that within weeks. We'll have people out and about participating in that. And I've absolutely read what Ian's written, and there's some very good points in it, and it's not at all far removed from what we're actually doing. So
let's talk about that trial. How many applications have you had? There's room for 150, right?
Which won't surprise anybody.
Is it oversubscribed?
Of course it is. We've got 150 spots, and I think it's about 400, I think, with a day or two to go for the applications. But as we, that doesn't surprise me. And I think as we work through those expressions of interest, we'll find that for some people, the timing or the location doesn't quite work. And then we'll work our way through to make sure we fill those spots. So we always knew it's a pilot, it's a trial, but the idea is that we monitor it in real time. And as I said, it's a critical part of the next phase for us as we move in to that Reconnecting New Zealanders strategy to have self-isolation. And so we're going to learn a lot from this. I want to thank the people who put themselves forward, and we'll identify within the coming days who's in the 150.
How do you identify the 150? What's the criteria?
So MB is going to be working through that. We obviously want to mix. We want to see how it works for different people, different businesses. We've got Auckland and Christchurch as the bases for the two for this part of the pilot. So we need to be able to work through that and making sure that we've got the businesses who we can learn the most from, who've got the best plan, because one of the things we've asked people to do is identify their plan, just as Ian has. And so we'll look at that, and MB officials will make those decisions. If we get down to it and we haven't got 150 that we can clearly identify that way, then we may need to have some form of balloting, but we'll see how we go working through the criteria first.
Sure. Just touching on some of the other issues that have been raised by the business community in this morning's report. Seeking from the government, and I know you talked about this earlier in the week, but a mandate to require staff to be vaccinated. And I think that, especially in Auckland, as people come back to the office eventually and to the workplaces, that's going to be a big one, isn't it? In terms of wanting to be assured that they're in a safe environment, that they, to all intents and purposes, working alongside double jabbed colleagues.
Yeah, and look, it won't come as a surprise to any of the CEs or probably anyone who's watching this that this is a tricky and new area of employment law. And so we are working our way through that as to what that means for individual employers. Various organisations are making their decisions now about that, and we want to support that. There is the scope within current employment law to work with your employees to come up with a plan and to implement that plan. You can write it into contracts, but obviously it's harder with existing contracts. So that's something we're very actively engaged with the business community in. Obviously for ourselves, we've put those mandates in place for border workers, and we're working through other sectors at the moment where we are the employer and we can find the justification. So yeah, I understand that. It's the same thing with rapid testing. It's the same emotion that sits behind it. How do we make sure that when people are coming into the workplace, they feel as safe as they possibly can? Obviously, the number one thing, though, while we're debating that, is that now's the time for people to get vaccinated. And I really thank the businesses who've stepped up to support their employees to do that, because in the end, regardless of what we do with the employment law side of things, we have to make sure that we're getting people vaccinated.
Why did it take 6 weeks to meet with Pfizer early on?
Well, it's not quite right. What it was at that point, we had dozens of pharmaceutical companies approaching us saying, we've got a drug. In the case of Pfizer, at that point, it hadn't even been actually developed. And so we went through that process with all of them. It had nothing to do with when we actually got what we got. It was simply when they sent a letter out saying, we're keen on this. We were working our way through a number of companies. Bear in mind, at that point, we hadn't made a decision that it would be Pfizer. Around the world, there was other pharmaceutical companies who were putting out their ideas. Within a few weeks of that period of time, we were sitting down and saying, yep, this is the direction we're going in, and those advanced purchase agreements were signed. So it didn't delay the arrival of the vaccines in New Zealand.
But your predecessor, who sat in the Deputy Prime Minister's chair, came out yesterday and said it was atrocious that it hadn't come to Cabinet that early on.
My memory of that situation is a tiny bit different than the former Deputy Prime Minister. There were always discussions taking place, but as I say, it wasn't like this is a firm offer for you to get vaccines, you could get them next week. That wasn't the situation we're in. Pfizer hadn't even finished their development at that point. So, the other thing I bear in mind here is really important element of the take-up of vaccine is that people believe it's safe. It is safe, and one of the reasons we know it's safe is we put it through MedSafe. We put it through the regulatory approvals. We had to do all of that work. But someone writing a letter saying we want to have a chat with you is not the same as saying there's a vaccine ready to order now. It wasn't. And we did get those advanced purchase agreements in early.
Sure. We've got a couple of minutes left, Minister. I wanted to touch on your own personal rating. You're top of the pops in terms of the Cabinet. David Seymour, interestingly, has finished top of all MPs, but certainly you're top of the pops in Cabinet. How do you and your colleagues in Cabinet take these ratings? Are they important to you? Do you talk about them?
I haven't talked to anyone about it, to be frank. Look, they're ratings. They're other people's opinions. We get judged every single day as politicians, and so I don't tend to take any individual poll or rating above any other. I'm just trying to work hard, and I am working hard to do my best to support New Zealand through what is probably one of the most challenging periods for our health and our economy, and certainly this century and probably most of the one before. And so my focus is just on that, on making sure we do our very, very best. The report is its usual mix of the insightful and the offensive, but that's just how it goes, and I'm not too concerned about that.
All right. And so possibly final question, but your own mood, or you've heard from the CEOs, your own mood as the Deputy Prime Minister of the country and Minister of Finance, and where we're headed in the next 12 to 18 months. Optimistic?
Yeah, I am optimistic about the next 12 to 18 months because I can see the resilience of the New Zealand economy. Where, the conversations I was having up till the day of the 17th of August were about labour shortages caused by the fact that the economy was going so well. And so, I have a great deal of faith in the New Zealand economy. And I think over that 12 to 18 month period, we should all be optimistic. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, and they are significant challenges, especially over the next few months, as we build up that vaccination rate and we put ourselves in a position to really fully launch into the Reconnecting New Zealanders strategy. So definitely optimistic, but very, very aware that there is still a challenging period, and also extremely aware of how tough it is for particular businesses and particular workers in those businesses where they're affected by the restrictions we've got in place. That's why we continue to provide the significant financial support that we do.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time this morning, Minister. We really do appreciate you answering some of the questions from the CEOs, and hopefully the report for you this year is more insightful than offensive, but certainly really do.
I said it was a mix.
So thank you, Minister. I'll hand back now to Fran to wrap and to hand over to Liam Dan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant and Shane, for that engaging and lively conversation. We've now got Business Editor-at-Large Liam Dan talking to Kirk Hope from Business New Zealand.
Great, thanks, Fran, and welcome, Kirk. Look, can we get started on the topic that really comes through strongly in the responses, but we know it's been top of mind for a lot of businesses, and that's labour shortages, skills shortages. It seems to be one of the big problems, and one that where business isn't necessarily getting that much sympathy.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a range of issues that are related to that. There's been a lot of a real lack of clarity around the government's immigration reset. I think the Minister for Immigration has made a pretty good step, and more recently by enabling what will be about 110,000 people to stay in the country, but those are people that are already here. So that's an important step, but it's probably not going to fill the gap, and immigration will still play a really big role. And businesses are going to be putting a lot of pressure, I think, continue to put a lot of pressure on the government over skills.
Yeah, that reset has kind of been confusing, hasn't it? I mean, that's whether you're for or against the policies, that seems like something for much further down the line. We've got very clear restrictions on immigration that are all to do with what's happening with COVID and what's happening in our borders right now.
Yeah, well, there's to be fair, I mean, it's part of the challenge that we face within our health community, and that's really had a real impact on some of the economic responses, if you like, and has shaped some of the economic responses. I mean, we haven't been able to bring in the health workers that we probably needed to be able to support a greater breadth and scope in MIQ, if that's the way that we wanted to continue to run the border. So yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a range of policy issues that remain to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're all hopeful we get those vaccination rates up and we can start with this reopening plan. Business wants to be involved in that. Do you think government has been listening around, allowing business to be involved?
Not enough, and I think that's probably something else that's come through in the mood report. Actually, I think the government needs to be a lot more open in the way that they want to partner with business. I think both at a political level and within the bureaucracy, there needs to be more openness to engaging more fully and more completely with business on solutions. I think there's a long way to go in terms of real partnership in collaboration on some of the solutions that we're going to need. And I think the government really need to rethink this quite strongly and quite quickly. We've seen some of the restrictions and the limitations that businesses have faced, and some of the slow processes and the lack of responsiveness because of that lack of partnership with business, and things like saliva testing and rapid antigen testing, and in fact, even in negotiations over obtaining vaccines, which really are a way to reopen the economy.
Yeah, I mean, that saliva testing's kind of a live issue. Do you think, often we see the government moving, but just not at a fast enough pace, because business is sort of chomping at the bit to offer solutions where possible. Are you optimistic there?
Not really. I mean, I do think, as I said, I think they need to be much more open. I mean, I think their natural instinct is to defer to others who aren't from the business community, and I think that's a real limitation of this government, and it will be a really significant limitation on how we reconnect New Zealand with the rest of the world. So they're going to have to change what they do. They're going to have to really confront their instincts actually a little bit,
And in the meantime, even if we accept, whatever weeks or months this process is going to take, there is a lot of businesses really struggling. We're constantly sort of dealing with this tension between what we're hearing from business on the ground, and then some of the, like the finance minister will talk about, obviously, strong GDP numbers. The economy has held up well at a macro level, but what are you hearing on the ground? What is the confidence like in businesses as they sort of, work to get through this next period?
Oh, look, there's a lot of pain on the ground and a range of sectors, well-known sectors. I mean, the tourism sector, the hospitality, some of retail, real struggles in those sectors. But even in what we're starting to see now is that there's even some challenges in places like construction, where there's still strong demand, and in some smaller parts of the financial services sector. So those are not typically industries that you'd see you haven't seen under stress so much. So that's really concerning. So one of the things that we see is an increase in loan defaults and credit defaults. That has led to a sort of uptick in company closures. A lot of those aren't going through a creditor's liquidation process. They're going through a voluntary liquidation process, because they're saying, look, actually, I can't see an end and I can't see a way out of this. That's not what we were facing a year ago. I mean, I think the national lockdown happened quickly. We got out of it. There was plenty of support. It's not like that this time.
Yeah, so it's undoubtedly a very stressful time that we're about to go through. And just to put it bluntly, is there enough support there for business from Finance Minister and government?
No, and I think that was a really disappointing thing, I guess, about the back end of this kind of alert level increase and then Auckland wending its way out, is while there was a kind of rough roadmap about picnicking and whatnot, there wasn't. I don't think business was used once in the statement that the Prime Minister made on Monday, and certainly there was no additional support for businesses. And I think there'll be a lot of people really who are going to say it's going to be another three weeks a month. I just can't. I'll end up defaulting on loans and owing money that I don't know how I'll repay, and so I'm going to have to shut up shop.
What would you like to see in terms of engagement with business and support for business over the next the start of next year and on?
Yeah, probably a greater understanding of the advantages that a strong relationship with the business community can bring for the government and for New Zealand. If you think about some of the technologies that we supply here to the rest of the world, the government should be really tapping into that a lot more closely. I mean, I think they have done it with certain companies, but I think they need to think about that more broadly. We're on the cusp of an actual real opportunity in New Zealand. So yeah, we've been quite negative in terms of the narrative thus far, but with the digitization, with ultra fast broadband in New Zealand, with moving away from the tyranny of distance that a strongly service-based economy can provide, we can do a lot of stuff, but we really need the government settings to be right, and we need the government to understand that and support it. So I think that relationship is going to be absolutely critical, and I think really clear policy thinking is going to be essential, and government can't do that by itself coming out of this.
Thank you once again, Liam and Kirk, for that interesting conversation. Plenty to debate there, and I'm sure the business debate will continue for some days yet. And once again, our thanks to Finance Minister Grant Robertson and NZME Managing Editor Shane Curry for that interesting Q&A, which has brought out some very engaging issues for debate. And a special thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't produce Mood of the Boardroom without you. Business New Zealand, we do this report in association with you, and our other sponsors on the slide in front of you: Fonterra, EMA, Westpac, Denton's Kensington Swan, Foresight Bar, Porta Taronga, Genesis, Spark, Barfoot Thompson and Deloitte. This has been a massive production, made even more difficult by doing it under COVID conditions. You can read the full report in the Herald print edition today and see it online at nzherald.co.nz.